Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. David Rosensweet, and I'm here live this morning to answer questions. And please put questions in the chat because I want to answer the questions that you have. We already have some questions that have been sent in, and here we go. And as I see your questions come into the chat, I'll take time to answer them as well. So good morning, Facebook user. And here comes the first question from a previous request. Can a drop in estrogen, even if a tiny bit, cause both anxiety and fatigue? Well, this is an interesting question because there's several moving parts to it. By the time a woman's estrogen starts to drop, well, her estrogen peaks at the age of 20, plus or minus a couple of years. That's the maximum output of a woman's ovaries for estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA that she'll have in her life, and they gradually decline from that point on. And there's a certain point where insufficient estrogens and everything that's accompanying it, the other hormones are also dropping. The woman starts to feel it. And some women go on to feel it far more substantially than others. In fact, by the time women go into menopause, 25% of women are not having symptoms that they can detect, although there are underlying biological and detrimental changes that are taking place in all women from the loss of these powerful hormones. But some women, as early as their 30s, the decline is sufficient for them to start having symptoms, and anxiety and fatigue are part of it. And, there's a theoretically that in most women, the decline in progesterone occurs earlier and is deeper and more profound than the decline in estrogen. So as the estrogen is declining, we want to remember that the decline in progesterone is occurring earlier and more profoundly. And progesterone is the great calmer, which is so different than other hormones because other hormones can be recruited for fight or flight, and they are. Estradiol, testosterone, DHEA, and thyroid, of course, and adrenaline and cortisol, of course. These are the biology of the stress response, and these ovarian hormones participate, except for progesterone. Progesterone is the great calming hormone. In fact, if I were to inject the proper dose of progesterone intravenous into any of us, including myself, we could be put to sleep so deep surgery could be performed on us. That's how calming progesterone is. So when you remove the calm of progesterone, what do you get? Anxiety, nervousness, jitteriness, and so it's a very common symptom. So I'm going to say that it may not be so much from the decline of estrogen, which is occurring in a woman in her 30s, and certainly by her 40s. It could be the accoutrement of the decline, and more profound decline of progesterone that is occurring. And then, interestingly enough, adequate progesterone is needed to sensitize thyroid hormone to its receptor sites. How wild is that? So without adequate progesterone, you don't get adequate thyroid stimulation. And thyroid is one of the main movers hormonally of metabolism, main animators of metabolism. We know this, that a woman who wants to see if she's ovulating will take her temperature every day. And why does she do that? Because if she ovulates, she's going to get a slight temperature increase when she ovulates. The reason is when she ovulates, very, very robust amounts of progesterone are produced by the ovary. Progesterone levels just spike and get really high during that second half of that cycle. And progesterone facilitates the action of thyroid hormone. And thyroid hormone, when it works better, increases metabolism and thus increases one of the products of metabolism, which is heat, body heat. So I'm thinking you might be naming more prominently one of the more common things that happens early on, even in the early 30s or mid 30s, to women is that's more profound decline of progesterone and the earlier decline of progesterone. And that's where that anxiety and fatigue, if we're going to use theory about it, it's no picnic to lose your estrogen. No, estrogen decline can cause very significant mood issues, including significant depression. So yeah, these hormones, they are major feel-good. They're the biology of feeling good. And I'm talking about every hormone you can name. They all matter for mental and emotional well-being, absolutely. And the declines are occurring. So yes, the answer is a drop in estrogen can result in a challenge to mood. And the flip side of that is replenishing estrogen and progesterone and even testosterone and DHEA at the right time can make a major difference. And I love that you asked the question, because one of our missions is to help women be able to identify early on when these hormonal declines are taking place and remedy them by excellent, precise, individualized hormone replenishing. Good question. And here's another question. Well, I'm going to take a question that just popped up in our chat. And the question is beta estradiol, in the form of, there's a brand name given there, bioidentical? Well, it is. And using the brand name, which I'm not going to use, it can be oral. And to give estradiol oral is a big mistake. And you'll get away with it 99% of the time. It will work, but you have to use larger oral doses than you do topically. And in fact, let me cut to the chase. A woman receiving estrogen should be receiving that estrogen topically, applied to skin or mucous membranes, and not orally. And let me give you a little history here. The birth control pill had a profound impact on the planet Earth and all of its people. And so millions and millions of women were given the birth control pill and are given the birth control pill. And in the warnings on the package inserts, there is a warning for the possibility of blood clot in the veins, otherwise known as thrombophlebitis. And there's a warning that there can even be death from a pulmonary embolus, where that blood clot breaks loose from the vein, travels to the lung, knocks out part of the lung or too big a part of the lung. So it's even resulted in some deaths. This is not a common complication, but it is possible. And it relates to the estrogen in the birth control pill, oral. And it's estradiol, just like you asked here, beta estradiol, they're the same thing. And oral estrogens promote coagulation in the delicate balance of how blood is balanced to not coagulate too easily, or it'll get clots in our veins, and to be able to coagulate sufficiently, or we would bleed from a simple cut. No, it's delicately poised. And what does oral estrogen do? It pushes the balance towards hypercoagulability. And that's why a small number, but significant number of women got clots in their veins and worse. So to take oral estrogen, to me, is why do it in the world when you do it, when topical estrogen is absorbed so beautifully, so easily. So forget about oral estrogen. And then they are putting estrogen in patches, estradiol in patches and gels, not the brand name that you mentioned. And, if that was the only thing that we had available, I'd say, okay. But I've spoken at length, and you can download our book from this Facebook page, and our staff is going to put up a link, and you can download a free copy of the book that I've written on hormones. And in it we go into this subject about what is the proper estrogen for a woman to be applying. And just to give you a sneak preview, and you've heard this from me before, it's biased. It's a combination of cancer protective estriol. In fact, 4 times as much or 3 times as much estriol as there is estradiol. So bias, the combination of estriol and estradiol, with estriol being far more prevalent because nature in young women has designed that there's about twice as much estriol as there's the sum of the other two major estrogens, estradiol and estrone. Why would that be so? Well, I can give you all kinds of theory and I go into it in the book, but let's not try and reinvent nature. So biased, not plain estradiol, is the optimal treatment to be applied topically to skin and mucous membranes. Facebook user. And now I'm going to another question that has been asked by someone on a previous Facebook page. I know that you have kindly discussed SHBG, which is sex hormone binding globulin, before, but I am wondering, is there a way to lower it naturally? Mine is high, and I'm also wondering if this is particularly dangerous. I do know it is the body being sort of protective, but it is confusing. Could you please help to shed some light again on SHBG? Thank you. It feels scary to me, but my doc is telling me to not be scared. So I'm going to say the same thing as your doctor's told you. This is nothing to be frightened about. There are diagnoses that can really get us scared, but this is not one of them. And just like you suggested here, sex hormone binding globulin is a protein that's floating around in the bloodstream. There's many proteins floating around in the bloodstream. And the interesting thing about ovarian hormones and other hormones is they're not water soluble. That means they don't get to dissolve in the blood when they're excreted from the ovary. So, but the body is, God, it's just so phenomenal how intricate and exquisite and just beyond belief we're designed. The body picks up the estrogens, the testosterone, and DHEA, and the progesterone that is excreted from the ovary into the bloodstream. It picks it up by binding these steroid hormones to plasma proteins. And there's several of them, albumin, globulins, and one of the principal binders and carriers, and that's how they're distributed around the body. They bind to a plasma protein and are carried around to the various tissues and organs and cells of the body by these plasma proteins, and then they're let go in the vicinity and they go into the cells. That's how they're transported by these little cars, these little electric vehicles, to use a metaphor. It picks up from the ovary and transports them all around the body. They're transporting proteins. And sex hormone binding globulin is one of the principal plasma proteins that does that. It's natural, it's needed, and any blood test on any man and woman, you're going to see that there's a normal reference range, that we all have it all the time. And it's also protective. So, for example, when a young woman who's at the peak of her ovarian hormone production takes a birth control pill, it's got estradiol in it, estrogen in it, and it's got this very, I'm going to call it a funky molecule. I'm not in love with this one, and I've spoken to a world expert on progestins, and oh my, that's a whole other topic, but it's got estradiol in it. And so a woman's body reads, so to speak, that, oh my, I'm at the peak of my ovarian hormone production, and someone has just given me I've just swallowed some extra estrogen. Well, that's excessive. What can I do to protect myself from excessive estrogen? Well, I'll just produce some more sex hormone binding globulin to bind up the excess. And that's what a young woman does. Birth control pills are notorious for raising the sex hormone binding globulin. It's not an illness, and that's why, there's no reason to be scared about it. It's a natural protective mechanism when your body reads there's excessive hormones floating around. Excessive ovarian hormones, for example, or in men, excessive testosterone. That sex hormone binding globulin will increase. In fact, the consequence of that in many young women, since sex hormone binding globulin also binds testosterone, in fact, it binds testosterone more avidly than it binds estradiol, yeah, a lot of young women have lost their libido from the binding of that testosterone, from the push of the sex hormone binding globulin upwards, elevated. So yeah, there's consequences to that. And this also can occur in menopause or even treating men in andropause if excessive amounts of hormones are administered. You can raise the sex hormone binding globulin. That's consequential because a woman has symptoms, and we replenish her low estrogens with some estrogens, for example. But she's already got an elevated sex hormone binding globulin, so her body will elevate that sex hormone binding globulin again. So you push a higher dose, and it raises the sex hormone. It can be a slippery upward slope when you're dealing with an elevated sex hormone binding globulin. And the interesting thing is, when a young woman goes on birth control pills and her sex hormone binding globulin goes up, you would think that when she stops the birth control pills, her sex hormone binding globulin would go down, as no doubt it does. But the interesting thing is, there are many women, and I run across this commonly, that they have no reason in the world to have an elevated sex hormone binding globulin when they're going into menopause, other than they took the birth control pill. The most extreme case I ever saw is the only way we could possibly believe that the woman had an elevated sex hormone binding globulin, she was in menopause, was when she took the birth control pill for 3 months when she was much younger and didn't like it. Well, the sex hormone binding globulin never went down. So imperative, compulsory in the menopause method is every woman that we begin treatment with, we get a blood test that includes sex hormone binding globulin. We want to know her initial status of sex hormone binding globulin. Now, we're not going to necessarily call it a problem, even if it's elevated, because some women, we can still treat them with hormones, and it doesn't disturb that sex hormone binding globulin, and the sex hormone binding globulin doesn't really come into play. But other women, it does what I described. We treat them with hormones, sex hormone binding globulin increases. We treat them with more hormone, the sex hormone. So we have to do something about the sex hormone binding globulin. I have been, over the years, given some suggestion of some nutritional supplements that would lower the sex hormone binding globulin, and herbs, but I'm not even going to mention them because I've done trials of them and they don't work in my hands. Perhaps some naturopathic physician or herbalist or a nutritional supplement expert will give me some new suggestions, but there's a pharmaceutical medication known as danazol, and it has been used in large doses, like in the hundreds of milligrams, for the treatment of endometriosis. So it's commonly used, and we can use it in much lower doses in women and men, a tenth of what is prescribed in endometriosis. So I've usually felt very safe in administering danazol, and it will lower the sex hormone binding globulin. And there's some cases where women have elevated sex hormone binding globulin where we just notate it, but the hormones are behaving normally. The 24-hour urines are giving reference range, beautiful optimal range results, and there's not a problem with the slightly elevated sex hormone binding globulin. But in the women that it does become a problem, we get that dosage increase in sex hormone binding globulin phenomena. I do prescribe danazol in low doses, and and I'm talking about less than 12.5 milligrams a day, sometimes 6.25 milligrams. We can get that dose pretty low. And the one thing is I've used sex hormone globulin in several patients, and there was an instance of a male in which we had to use larger doses in males, that he started developing one of the side effects of sex hormone binding globulin, side effects of danazol, the medication, which is well known, that it can lower the white count. Bam, we had to stop the danazol in the treatment of this man. I'm constantly on the lookout for it with women, even though we're using lower doses. So Yeah, sex hormone binding globulin. Don't be scared about it. We usually don't have a problem with it, even if it's elevated. And when it is elevated, sometimes we can administer very low doses of danazol and it'll go down and the balance can be achieved because there's always a solution to issues in women, including issues with sex hormone binding globulin. And I see a message from a dear colleague of mine, Dr. Berkson. I'd like to announce that on Thursday morning, Dr. Berkson and I are going to be on Facebook Live together on this channel, and we're going to have some fun. Yes, Dr. Berkson is a wealth of knowledge and energy and poster woman for the benefits of long-term hormone replenishment. And so hi to you, Lindsay, and I'll see you Thursday morning. And yeah, I encourage you all to join us this coming Thursday morning at 10 o'clock Eastern Time, where Dr. Berkson and I will just spontaneously explore topics together. Here's another question from someone online. Any special advice for us in surgical menopause with no ovaries? Yes, I have profound advice. Do the same thing that a woman in menopause, a natural menopause, would do. Find an expert, someone who's really specializing in treating women with bioidentical hormones, compounded bioidentical hormones, and be treated and receive it as soon as possible. Because the good news is when someone really knows what they're doing, we can arrive at and treat you with the estradiol, the estriol, the testosterone, the DHEA, and the progesterone that your ovary no longer is producing because it's no longer there. And you know what? If a woman didn't tell me, let's say a 45-year-old woman came to me, she was having symptoms of ovarian hormone decline, hot flashes, sleep disturbance and stuff, I cannot distinguish whether or not she's had a hysterectomy or whether or not she went into menopause. And I want to tell you this is great work can be done with a woman with a hysterectomy, and the earlier the better. In fact, we advise women going in for a total hysterectomy that includes removal of the ovaries to have the hormones in your hand the day you go into the hospital for that surgery. And because you can administer them that day. The ovaries are removed and you're replenishing the hormones just like a woman would be who had a natural menopause. So that's great news. And please download the copy of my book, because the description of a method that I consider to be just wonderful for replenishing your hormones and individualizing it. And this is part of the key to the highway. Getting the hormones right, get the method of application right, get the carriers right. I mean, we're very strong proponents of topical hormones in an organic oil base, which is what this is. And get it right, and there'll be no difference to speak of between you and a woman who went into menopause naturally. That's the great news. And which progesterone would you suggest if you have a soy intolerance? There's a brand name here, made me put on 12 pounds in 2 months. Well, I always prescribe, and I've never done anything different than prescribe compounded, bioidentical, micronized progesterone. And the molecule is so pure that I'm unaware of anyone who even has a soy allergy have any trouble with it. Yes, the majority of these compounded bioidentical hormones are coming from pharmaceutical manufacturers who are expertly deriving them from soy, principally, but I've never heard of someone who had a soy allergy have trouble with any topical progesterone or estrogen, etc., that was compounded bioidentical. There's always a first, but my goodness, I've treated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women over 25 years. And with progesterone, there are a few women who don't tolerate progesterone, but I don't think it's because of what it was chemically purified from and derived from. So compounded bioidentical progesterone, I always start with topical progesterone. This is a 200 milligram per milliliter, 8.7 milligram per drop prescription micronized progesterone, certified organic oils base. You can also get this in the form of gels and creams. And you can also get it in the form of capsules. I did mention to you earlier that we do not want estrogen or testosterone to be taken orally. Yet it is safe to take progesterone orally. And sometimes we prefer progesterone orally because of this wonderful metabolite that can assist women who are really having sleep difficulty. It's called allopregnenolone. It's a metabolite of progesterone. So sometimes there's a special advantage for women that we cannot restore normal sleep with topical progesterone and topical estrogen, also a very important component. We will shift to oral progesterone. And yeah, that's what I would recommend. Get thee to thy compounding bioidentical pharmacist and use micronized progesterone. Hello from Spain. Hello to you. And then this is a question from Summer online. If you take progesterone cream in addition to 200 milligrams oral progesterone, can that lower the estradiol in the body? Well, you can take too much progesterone. The issue is, can you take too much? And yes, you can. It's a technical issue. It's really a matter of dosage and dosage balance with the estrogen. Estrogen binds best and most avidly to cellular nuclear estrogen receptor sites. Oh my goodness, dive into that cell and that nucleus and see how these things interact with DNA. Oh my God. It'll make you a believer in the divine if you don't already. Estrogen binds best and most avidly to its own receptor sites, but it's not the only thing that binds to estrogen receptor sites. In fact, progesterone binds to estrogen receptor sites. Nowhere with the strength and power that estrogen does, but there's a law called the law of chemical mass action. And if you got way too much progesterone, the mere mass of the amount of progesterone will push estrogen out of its receptor sites and occupy, and thus you don't get the kind of function you want out of an estrogen receptor site. You can overwhelm by a simple amount of excessive progesterone estrogen receptor sites, and you won't get the proper binding of estrogen to its receptor sites. You'll get some progesterone. The law of chemical mass action. You can Google it. And yeah, you can overdose on these hormones, and that's part of the art. And that's part of the science. And you want to get thee to someone who's specializing in replenishing hormones in women. Absolutely do that, because there's folks who are not aware of this. And it's very common out there that those who are prescribing to women have these broad-based practices, and hormones are a small part of it. And there's so many moving parts to treating a woman properly with hormones that we highly encourage providers, and that's what we do. I spend a majority of my time training and mentoring healthcare providers, physicians and nurse practitioners, and prescribing pharmacists on how to treat women with hormones, the proper way to do it. And there's oh my goodness, I'm so grateful that I specialized 25 years ago, because it allows someone to get expert and master this vast field of treating women in the climacteric. So, yeah, you can overdose. It isn't so much that you're taking topical, but when you're getting up to 200 milligrams of oral progesterone, you're pushing it. Like in my practice, even when I give oral progesterone, the average that a woman is totally satisfied with and getting what she needs from progesterone is 75 milligrams. And some women are totally satisfied on 50 milligrams. And occasionally a woman is totally satisfied on 25 milligrams of oral micronized progesterone. And occasionally a woman needs to do 100, and I have no women above 125 milligrams. That's 200 milligrams. Look out. One way you can tell if you wake up groggy in the morning, but it can have that mass action effect on the estrogen, and it can lower estrogen effect in the body. I'm going to take another question from prior questions submitted. Do you have any idea how long it takes for a woman in menopause who has started taking hormones recently? How long it takes for these hormones to start protecting her heart, brain, bones, and muscles? I know we should take these hormones for the rest of our lives, but do we start to help our bodies sooner than later, or does it take years? Thank you. Interesting question. There's some complexity in there. And I could say that the microsecond you start taking properly prescribed and individualized and proper hormones and optimal hormones, you're going to be getting an effect. And the question is that effect detectable? And part of it depends. Like, one of my favorite things to do in treating a woman is to start that treatment in the perimenopause at a time of hormonal decline. In some women, that hormonal decline can be significant enough that I'm treating her in her early 30s or her mid 30s or her late 30s, because her body decline is such that when we replenish the hormones, we bring her up to some reasonable levels. And God, it's so easy. And one of the reasons it's so easy is her body is used to interacting with the hormones. She's got a lot of experience in doing so. And the interaction is very important because there's the hormones, but the hormones have their effect by interacting with receptor sites specific for the hormones. It's that interaction between the hormone and the receptor site that really matters. And if there's not been hormones for a while, those receptor sites can go dormant. And the real question is, can we awaken them? And for example, a woman who hasn't had a period for 6 months or a year or 6 years, and she has had no hormonal treatment, her receptor sites can have gone dormant, and it's an art to wake them up. Now, having said that, I've treated women in their late 80s to significant benefit. So you never say never. And the women I'm talking about never had a hormone from the time they went their last period, which is 40 years previous. So you can definitely have beneficial effect. And I have a video of my mother-in-law and my mother. And my mother-in-law had lost the ability to stand. She couldn't walk without a walker. And she fell and fractured her hip and pelvis. And she fell because she lost all strength in her lower extremities. And then we have a video of her sitting on a low couch after 3 months of treatment with topical hormones. And she's got her arms up in the air, and she's standing up from a low couch without using her hands to get herself up. That's how dramatic that was. So you never say never. Now, the earlier you start protecting your bones, your arteries, your brain, your bladder, your vagina, your muscles, etc., the better. And there is a precedent. There are some women who are susceptible to arteriosclerosis, and when they lose that protection of estrogen and they haven't had hormones for a while, they haven't had estrogens and this protection to the arteries and the coronary arteries that estrogen conveys, absolutely it does, they can get into some atherosclerosis, and we have to take that in special consideration for a woman who hasn't had hormones. The magic number that's stated is 10 years. If you haven't had hormones for 10 years, we really want to evaluate your coronary arteries before we treat you. But, there's no magic number. When I see risk factors for coronary artery issues, and for women who haven't had hormones for quite a few years, we evaluate those coronary arteries. So the earlier the better. And I've seen women with osteoporosis. They've lost bone. They have fragile bones. I've seen bone restored and move towards osteopenia and even into normal ranges. So it's never too late. And so I can say that how wonderful that you're starting to take these hormones. Yes, take them for the rest of your life, and they will affect your heart, your brains, and your muscles. Muscles, one of the biggest things we need as we age, because we don't really want to get into canes, walkers, and wheelchairs, and that's from loss of muscle. We don't really want to get into adult diapers, which is loss of the health of the vagina, coupled with loss of the muscle that holds up the uterus and the bladder. So it's a big deal. Well, that video of my mother-in-law who got up from a low couch with her arms outstretched after not having enough strength to stand stably in her kitchen. It was probably 6 months prior when she fell and fractured her pelvis and humerus, her big arm bone, and took 3 months in rehab. And that's when we started her on the hormones after she got out of rehab. So yes, you can restore muscles even in your late 80s. So take these hormones and take them for the rest of your lives, because the information that you should take the hormones for the shortest period of time and the least dose was totally unscientific. It was based on this tremendous fear that was put out by the Women's Health Initiative that was wrong. Here's the correct science around even Prembro and the hormone-derived estrogen with the progestin, that women who are treated with hormones, even Prempro, especially Prempro, are at less risk for breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke than women who are untreated with hormones. That Women's Health Initiative was false. It was the falseness, the scientific insignificance was there, published in the original publication. People glossed over that. They didn't see it was statistically significant. The same study committee that published that original Women's Health Initiative that scared women all over the world and healthcare providers, false. And it was retracted by the same committee that published that original article in 2017. They published it in the same journal to quote, after 18 years of follow-up, there is no increased incidence of breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke. The damage that did to women all over the world who stopped their hormones, and then even if they resumed them, they were told to take them for the shortest periods of time in the least dose possible. Totally incorrect. That was a totally invention. There was no science behind that. They were just trying to address the scare and the fact that when women stopped their hormones, their lives fell off a cliff, so many of them. So they tried to come up with a minimal solution without proving it. So, moral of the story, take those hormones for the whole rest of your life, and that includes men. Men have been hormones. Here's my testosterone. Definitely, I'm so grateful for it. And yeah, when we lose these hormones, we want to take them for whole life. Let's see. Here's the Dr. Bergson commenting. Yep, randomized trial fiasco, and most gynecologists don't believe in hormones. Not a religion, but a physiological fact. So yeah, take those hormones. And here's another question that came in from previous. I am using a progesterone cream on my face. Is this an okay thing to do, or will it raise my progesterone levels? Also, same with my estrogen creams. Well, I first heard of the use of hormones to the face from a woman, a patient of mine. She came to me and said, I really love these hormones. And she was using a biased gel, and she was using at the time, 25 years ago, she was using a progesterone gel as well. And she said, do you think it'd be okay if I applied some of these hormones to my face? And I thought, and I could see no reason why not. And she said, well, I already have, and it's making a major difference in the skin on my face. And Well, I also knew at that time, the rumor was that expensive French skin creams had female hormones in them, especially estrogen, but they didn't have it on the label. They were getting put in there because expensive French skin cream producers knew that estrogen was so crucial for the skin, estrogen especially. And so I coupled that with what my patients already told me she was doing. I've had that happen many times. And absolutely, we suggest, in fact, to women, when they apply their Biest, they put some on their arm and they rub their arms together and they put a little drop and they put a little bit, they rub their hands on there and they take the final rub onto their face, neck, and back of hands, because direct application of these hormones are excellent for the skin. Also, you're going to get benefit to the skin by when you're applying it even to your arms, because it's going to go into your whole body. And as you replenish, and this is the general idea, replenish your hormone levels to the optimal amount for a woman in the climacteric. And eventually you're going to get benefit to your skin. You're going to see the difference. I mean, the benefit to the skin is enormous. Think of the difference between a 17-year-old young woman's skin, or a woman in her 20s, and a 70-year-old woman's skin who's not on hormones. The difference is estrogen primarily. It's tremendously important for the skin. Now, are you going to increase your general body levels? Well, you want to get your general body levels of estrogen and progesterone really great. And you want to do that with someone who really knows what they're doing. I've said it over and over again, someone who's specializing in individualizing and testing, getting the 24-hour urine hormone testing, getting the optimal levels for your body, your individual body proper. And you're not going to, if you're going to take a little extra and put it on your face, that is not going to affect your general body level to any significant amount. But the thing is, you want to get your general body levels accurate. And then the other thing I'd like to say is the creams and gels. Oh my. And I've told this story many times. After treating women for 10 years with hormones, I had never seen a hormone until the day that the compounding pharmacist, by mistake, shipped a woman's hormones to our office rather than directly to the patient. And here I'm looking at this white cosmetic jar. That's what it was like 15 years ago. That contained Biest in it. And I was just fascinated. And I snuck open the top and looked at it. And out came this strong odor. And I did some investigation, and I learned that 99+% of what was in that jar was the carrier, the gel. And the gels were strong solvent, and so are the creams, because you need strong solvents to bring these ovarian hormones up into solution. And in order to administer an exact dose each time, the original belief was you had to you had to get them into solution. So every quarter teaspoon back in the day, or every toppy click or syringe push nowadays, you're getting the exact same dose every time. But it takes strong solvents to do it. Steroid hormones are known to not dissolve in water, hardly, just infinitesimal amount, and to be poorly soluble. And so you need strong solvents, something on the order of alcohol or something stronger. And these solvents that are used have toxic potential. Look them up: carbapol, lipoderm. They're strong solvents. So the day that I opened that jar and did some investigation, my partner and I, my son, we decided to go on a journey to see if we could find a safe carrier. And we did. We've actually got a patent on any hormone that's dispensed in oil, all of them. And we have a patent, a mixture of 3 oils that are just excellent for the skin. And that was one of the reasons we chose them. So I did some math and realized that I was detoxifying my patients. I was suggesting to them that they do all kinds of measures to get the toxins out of their body. Meanwhile, I was asking them to apply a quart a year of the hormones to their skin that were in these potentially toxic solvents. So the remedy was we have a certified organic oils base. and apply that to the skin. Your skin's going to love it. These are oils that are really very beneficial for the skin. That was I spoke extensively to the woman known as the oil lady in the United States, Candace, and we came up with this formulation with her. Thank you very much, and Barbie for suggesting her. And apply estrogen and testosterone always topically, and we also apply progesterone and DHA topically, and occasionally we'll go to oral progesterone. But moral of the story, I'm not a real fan of applying these solvents to the facial skin or any skin. Why don't you apply organic oils mixed to your skin? So that's the ultimate in using hormones with the skin. Let's see. Do we have any questions? How do you feel about pelvic floor physical exercise for pain with sex? Well, number one, pelvic floor exercises can be extremely important, and I'm going to describe them in detail. But number two, pain with sex. This is the type of question that I would need to know a lot more from the questioner about what the details about the pain with sex. Like, for example, if a woman is used to having intercourse with no pain whatsoever, and then over the course of time she starts developing pain with intercourse, this is a progression that takes place from hormone decline. For example, the health of the vagina is totally dependent on adequate estrogen levels, also testosterone and DHEA, but especially estrogen levels. And as a woman's estrogen starts declining, so does her lubrication, and so does the health of the actual vaginal tissue. It gets real thin, and this is a guaranteed discomfort on intercourse, and it will progress to pain on intercourse. Some women remedy these with lubrication. The one I recommend is organic coconut oil, and not these commercial products, which are solvents, some of them, and some of them are astringent. My God, you want to be very cautious with what you're applying to a vagina that's not as healthy as it used to be when you were young. And then ultimately, one of our goals in treating in replenishing hormones in a woman is to get a sufficient amount of hormone that pain on intercourse goes away, because the health of her vagina is improved back to reasonable levels and can be seen. So women who are taking proper amount of estrogen in their climacteric years and go in for their annual exams, their gynecologist or their family doctor or nurse practitioner who's doing that exam will comment on the health of that vaginal mucosa, because here's an interesting fact. In order to protect the bones, you need the right amount of estrogen, and how you can determine the right amount of estrogen clinically is if there's decent health to the vagina. We actually have the numbers, and we publish those numbers on the 24-hour urine hormone test report that we give. It happens to be minimal, 8 micrograms of the sum of estradiol and estrone per 24 hours. And clinically, ultimately, treatment with estrogen, and that would be biased, should restore the health of that vagina. Sometimes it's a 3, 6, or 9-month project, depending when the woman has begun those hormones and how intense that vaginal atrophy is. So you've asked me a question about pelvic floor, and I'm telling you that the major cause of dyspareunia, which is pain on intercourse, is from loss of health of the vagina that can be restored. Absolutely it can, by the very hormones that you're applying to your arms. And sometimes we'll do a jump start by giving a woman some estriol vaginal in the oils, or we'll give a woman biased in the oils to apply directly to the vagina to accelerate the restoration of that vagina, but be patient. If you've been without these hormones for a long period of time, then you want to give it 3, 6, 9 months, or even a year for restoration of the vagina. But that vaginal health will restore. And once you restore vaginal health, you have enough estrogen in you to protect your bones. That's very significant. And I show in our professional training program, I show everyone the numbers and the research papers out of which that was derived. Now, pelvic floor exercises. This can be very important because there's a muscle that holds up the organs of the pelvis. And what's in that pelvis? Bladder, uterus, ovaries, and some of the bowel, some of the large intestine. So there's a very significant muscle called the levator ani that holds all of this up. And the levator ani is subject to the same muscle loss that all muscles in a woman's body are subject to, and in a man's body, from the loss of her testosterone, from the loss of her androgens. You lose those androgens. Take a look at elderly people on beaches. First of all, there's not as many as you'd think walking the beaches in many locations, especially Florida. And when you do see them, their thighs and their calves are super thin in so many instances. That's actual muscle loss. Or a woman who develops flab right here, where she's lost triceps muscle, and in other locations of her body. That is called sarcopenia. It's the loss of actual muscle tissue. And one of the major causes of the loss of that muscle tissue is the loss of feminine androgens. And same in men. The king of the androgens in men is testosterone. The queen of the androgens in women is testosterone. Testosterone, testosterone, testosterone. By 3 years from the last period, every single woman will be way too low in testosterone. Many women these days are entering the loss of the period time of their life, known as the climacteric, hitherto known as menopause. We're weaning ourselves away from this word. Many women are entering the climacteric with low testosterone already because they've over-recruited their testosterone over the course of the decades for mobilization for the biology of the stress response. So these androgens really matter, and getting those androgens adequate are crucial for every muscle in your body, including the levator ani. And the consequences of losing that levator ani, along with vaginal atrophy from the loss of the estrogens and other hormones, is you lose control of your bladder. You get incontinent and you wind up in adult diapers. And this is not something that women who have this, they're grateful to have the diapers, but they are not grateful that things went that far. So prevention, prevention, prevention. An ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. Replenish those ovarian hormones, every one of them. Estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, DHEA, they all matter so much. And the pelvic exercise is just like if you wanted to build your biceps, you would curl weights or you would pull rubber bands to use those biceps in a muscular way that you had to really use those muscles. That will increase the power of those muscles over time. Any muscle that you're exercising and you're doing a good job of exercising it, the strength is going to improve. Well, we want the strength of the levator ani to improve. We definitely do not want to leave out the androgens for the health of that levator ani, and that's the pelvic floor we're really talking about. But there's an exercise that you can do to strengthen and tighten the levator ani. And let's do it together. Let's close our eyes and squeeze your anus and relax it. And squeeze it and relax it. Squeeze it and relax it. Squeeze it, relax it. Those had a funny name of the doctor who first suggested it. It's called Kegel exercises, but I like the name pelvic floor exercises. All you're doing is what you do with your bias. If You squeeze your bias and relax it, and squeeze it. I mean, squeeze your biceps, not your bias. Squeeze your biceps and relax it. You are exercising that muscle, and you're helping that muscle. Well, you're squeezing your levator ani. That is contracting the levator ani, otherwise known as the pelvic floor. Women have told me that they put up a sign by their toilet paper rack that says "squeeze," and every time they go to pee or have a bowel movement, they're doing those exercises. Do them as many times a day as you can remember. There's all kinds of techniques. Women who drive a lot say every time they put their brake on, they squeeze. It's a wonderful exercise to do. Here's a question, a rather esoteric one. Does testosterone increase aldosterone if you have low aldosterone? Well, these things can be determined when there's actual low aldosterone. There's many moving parts to aldosterone, and one of them has to do with salt intake. But there are people who have chronically low aldosterone, and there's a aldosterone molecule that you can take, and if with a low aldosterone, especially with the water and salt imbalances that you can run into with a low aldosterone, you want to take that medication called spironolactone. And I wouldn't rely on testosterone. When you look at the biochemistry, you can see how aldosterone is produced, and you could always check it out. If that's on 24-hour urine hormone test, will tell you exactly, because you can easily measure aldosterone on there. And I have never approached the rare instances of low aldosterone by trying to replenish testosterone, and yet we're always replenishing testosterone, and I've never seen that effect that you're talking about. But I'm sorry that I even read the question, because I just don't have enough information to answer you accurately. And then Dr. Berkson is asking, have you worked with vagina oxytocin? We can talk about that on Thursday if you'd like. Absolutely. Oxytocin, I'm adding it to our list of topics, is Dr. Berkson has wonderful things to say about oxytocin, and I so look forward again. Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, Dr. Berkson and I are going to have a discussion, and we're going to cover whatever questions you send in and some thoughts of our own, because undoubtedly we'll have a lot of fun things to talk about. And that's it for today. It's always a pleasure and enjoyable for me to do this with you, and I wish you all so well. It's good to be with you again, and we'll see those of you who want to on Thursday morning. Bye-bye for now.